The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the weathered wooden platform, and Hannah Thompson pressed her gloved hand against the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack through her ribs like an egg. Green River, Wyoming stretched before her in the late afternoon sun of July 1878, a collection of sun-bleached buildings that looked nothing like the bustling town described in the letters. Dust swirled around the coach wheels as the driver climbed down, and Hannah took a steadying breath, smoothing the front of her best traveling dress, which was now hopelessly wrinkled after 3 weeks of bone-rattling travel from Philadelphia. She had come all this way to marry a man she had never met, a rancher named Lucas Norton, who had written her the most beautiful letters over the past 6 months. Letters filled with poetry and promises, descriptions of Wyoming sunsets, and a life of comfortable prosperity. But as Hannah stepped down from the coach, her legs trembling beneath her skirts, she caught sight of her reflection in the station window, and her courage nearly failed her completely. The scar ran from her left temple down to her jaw, a thick rope of pink and white tissue that pulled at the corner of her eye and twisted her mouth slightly when she tried to smile. The fire that had claimed her parents' home 2 years ago had taken everything from her. Her family, her home, her prospects, and her face. The beautiful woman Lucas Norton had been corresponding with existed only in an old photograph taken before the fire, a photograph her desperate aunt had sent without Hannah's knowledge. "Miss Thompson." A boy of perhaps 15 approached her, his hat clutched in his hands. "Mr. Norton sent me to fetch you. He is waiting at the church." Hannah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. This was it. The moment when Lucas Norton would see what he had truly ordered, and she would watch whatever kindness existed in his eyes turn to horror or pity or worse, cold calculation about whether he could bear to look at her across the breakfast table for the rest of his life. The boy loaded her single trunk onto a wagon, and Hannah climbed up beside him. As they rolled through the dusty streets of Green River, she tried to prepare the words. She would tell him immediately. She would give him the chance to refuse before any vows were spoken. It was only fair. The church was a simple white building with a cross on top, standing at the edge of town, where the grasslands began their roll toward distant mountains. Several horses were tied outside, and Hannah could see figures moving inside through the open door. "Here we are, miss," the boy said, helping her down. Hannah's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold her small bag. She walked toward that open door as if walking toward her own execution, each step feeling like it might be her last as a woman with any hope at all. Inside the church, a handful of people had gathered. A preacher in a black suit, 2 women in their Sunday best who must be witnesses, and a man standing at the altar with his back to her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a clean white shirt and dark trousers with boots that looked freshly polished. His hair was dark and neatly trimmed. He turned as her footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, and Hannah got her first look at Lucas Norton's face. He was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of summer sky. Those eyes took her in now, traveling from her hat down to her face, and Hannah watched it happen. The smile that had begun to form on his lips froze. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face as if someone had opened a tap and let it all run out. "No," he whispered. The word hung in the air like smoke. Hannah felt something inside her chest crack and splinter. "Mr. Norton," she began, her voice barely audible, "I need to tell you something. I should have told you before. The photograph you received, it was taken before the fire that killed my family. I am not what you ordered. I am not the woman you expected. If you wish to refuse this marriage, I will understand completely. I have enough money for a ticket back east." This was not true. She had exactly 17 cents to her name, but she would find work. She would scrub floors or take in washing, anything rather than force this man into a marriage he clearly did not want. Lucas Norton stared at her for a long moment. The silence stretched out until Hannah thought she might shatter from the weight of it. Then he took a step forward and another until he stood directly in front of her. "You are not what I ordered," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "You are better than I deserved." Hannah blinked. "What?" "The man who wrote you those letters," Lucas said, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. "He does not exist. I cannot read or write beyond signing my name. I paid the school teacher, Mrs. Hadley, to write those letters for me. I told her what to say, but she made them pretty. Made them sound like they came from an educated man, a gentleman. I am just a rancher, miss. I work with my hands. I have dirt under my fingernails more often than not. I live in a 2-room cabin that is not even finished. The roof leaks when it rains. I have no poetry in me, no fine words. You traveled all this way expecting to marry a man who could write you beautiful things, and instead you get me." Hannah stared at him. "You think you are the disappointment in this situation." "I know I am," Lucas said. His blue eyes met hers directly, unflinching. "But if you will still have me, I promise I will work every day to be worthy of you. I will build you a proper house. I will learn to read better, to write properly. I will do everything in my power to make you happy." "Mr. Norton," Hannah said, and now tears were streaming down her face following the path of her scar, "look at me. Really look at me." "I am looking," Lucas said softly. "I see a woman who has survived something terrible. I see strength. I see courage. It took more bravery than I will ever possess to step down from that stage knowing what reception you might receive. You came anyway. That is what I see." One of the women witnesses was crying now too. The preacher cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should proceed with the ceremony," he suggested gently. Hannah looked up at Lucas Norton, this man who had just given her the most precious gift anyone could offer, acceptance without condition. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, please." The ceremony was brief but beautiful. When Lucas took her hand to slide the simple gold band onto her finger, Hannah noticed his hands were shaking as badly as her own. His fingers were calloused and strong, the hands of a man who worked hard. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas hesitated before leaning down to kiss her. "Is it all right?" he asked quietly, just for her ears. Hannah nodded, and his lips touched hers so gently it was barely a kiss at all, more like a promise. Afterwards, the witnesses introduced themselves as Mrs. Crawford and Mrs. Bennett, wives of nearby ranchers. They had brought food for a wedding supper, which they set out on a table at the back of the church. Mrs. Crawford, a plump woman with kind eyes, took Hannah's hands. "Welcome to Green River, dear," she said warmly. "We are glad to have another woman out here. Lord knows we need more civilizing influence on these rough men." "Thank you," Hannah managed. They ate fried chicken and biscuits and dried apple pie, and Lucas was quiet throughout, mostly just watching Hannah with an expression she could not quite decipher. When it came time to leave, he helped her up onto a wagon seat, her trunk loaded in the back along with several parcels the women had pressed upon them. The ride to Lucas's ranch took nearly an hour as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. The landscape was vast and open in a way that made Hannah's chest feel tight. She had never seen so much sky, so much emptiness. In Philadelphia, buildings had pressed in on all sides. Here, there was nothing but grass and wind and distance. "It is different from what you are used to," Lucas said, the first words he had spoken since leaving town. "Yes," Hannah agreed, "but not in a bad way. It is beautiful." Lucas glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "You think so? Most folks from back east find it too empty. Too lonely." "I think I need it empty," Hannah said quietly. Philadelphia was full of people who knew me before, who remembered what I looked like before. Every time they looked at me, I could see them comparing. Here, no one has to compare. This is just who I am. Lucas was quiet for a moment, then said, "The fire that scarred you. It took your family, my parents and my younger brother," Hannah confirmed, her throat tight. "I was the only one who made it out. Sometimes I wonder if that makes me lucky or cursed." "Lucky," Lucas said firmly. "Definitely lucky. Though I am sure it does not feel that way most days." They arrived at the ranch as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The cabin was indeed small, just 2 rooms as Lucas had said, but it sat in a protected valley with a creek running nearby and mountains rising in the distance. There was a barn, a corral with several horses, and what looked like the beginnings of a larger house being built nearby. Lucas helped Hannah down from the wagon. "I started building the new house when you agreed to marry me," he explained, gesturing to the construction. "It is not finished yet, but I will work on it every day until it is. 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, a parlor. I want you to have a proper home." Hannah looked at the framed structure, then back at the cabin. "Can we go inside?" The cabin's interior was neat but sparse. A bed in one corner, a table with 2 chairs, a stove, some shelves with basic supplies. Everything was clean, though clearly the home of a bachelor who owned nothing unnecessary. "I know it is not much," Lucas began, but Hannah cut him off. "It is perfect," she said, and she meant it. After sleeping in boarding houses and the stagecoach for weeks, the cabin looked like paradise. Lucas set her trunk down near the bed, then stood awkwardly in the middle of the room. "I will sleep in the barn," he said abruptly, "until you are comfortable, until you know me better. I do not expect you to share a marriage bed with a stranger." Hannah turned to look at him, this man who kept surprising her with his consideration. "You are my husband now, Lucas. This is your home. I will not turn you out of your own bed." "I have slept in the barn plenty of times," Lucas said. "It is no hardship. Please, Hannah. Let me do this one thing to make you feel safe here." His use of her first name sent a small flutter through her stomach. "All right," she agreed, "but only until I am settled. I do not want to be the kind of wife who sends her husband to the barn." A smile tugged at Lucas's lips, the first real smile she had seen from him. "I will get your trunk unpacked for you before I go tend the horses. Are you hungry? I could make you some supper." "The ladies fed us very well at the church," Hannah reminded him. "But I would love some water to wash with, if that is possible." Lucas immediately began heating water on the stove, bringing her a basin and clean cloths. He showed her where everything was kept, explaining his daily routine, the work that needed doing on the ranch. He raised horses primarily, he told her, breeding and training them for sale to the cavalry and to ranchers throughout Wyoming and Montana. "I have 3 mares about to foal," he said, "and a stallion I have been working with for 6 months who is finally starting to trust me. Maybe tomorrow you would like to see them." "I would," Hannah said, touched by his eagerness to share his world with her. Lucas left her alone to wash and change into her nightgown. Through the small window, she could see him walking to the barn, his shoulders squared against the gathering darkness. Hannah unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 other dresses on pegs by the bed, setting out her brush and mirror. When she caught sight of her reflection, she touched the scar gently. Lucas had called her strong and courageous. Looking at herself now, she tried to see what he saw instead of what she had been seeing for 2 years. A ruined face, a spoiled life. Maybe here in Wyoming she could be someone different, someone new. Sleep came surprisingly easily in the quiet cabin. Hannah woke to the sound of roosters crowing and sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment she forgot where she was, then memory returned. Wyoming married a new life. She dressed quickly in her simplest dress and ventured outside. The morning air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of grass and sage. Lucas was already up, working with a horse in the corral. He had the animal on a long lead rope, moving it in circles around him, his voice low and calm as he gave commands. Hannah stood by the fence, watching the easy way he moved, the confidence in his handling of the powerful animal. He noticed her after a few minutes and led the horse over. Morning. Did you sleep well? Better than I have in months, Hannah admitted. That is a beautiful horse. This is Thunder, Lucas said, running his hand along the animal's neck. He was badly treated by his previous owner. Took me weeks before he would even let me touch him. Now look at him. The horse did seem calm, though his ears swiveled constantly, alert to everything. Hannah reached out slowly, letting the horse sniff her hand before touching his soft nose. Thunder huffed warm air against her palm. He likes you, Lucas observed. That is a good sign. Thunder does not like most people. They had breakfast together, bread and bacon that Lucas cooked in a heavy iron skillet. The meal was simple but good, and they ate mostly in comfortable silence. Afterwards, Lucas showed Hannah around the ranch properly, introducing her to all the horses, explaining his plans for expansion. The army needs good horses, he said, and I am building a reputation for training them right. In a few years, if everything goes well, this ranch could be really successful. I want to build you the life you deserve, Hannah. The life I promised in those letters, even if I did not write them myself. What did you tell Mrs. Hadley to write? Hannah asked curiously. Lucas looked embarrassed. I told her you were brave for coming out west alone, that I admired courage in a woman. I told her to say I would work hard to make you happy, to give you a good home. I told her to describe Wyoming, the mountains and sky, because I thought maybe you would like it here if you could picture it. The poetry and fancy stuff, that was all her, but the feeling behind it, that was mine. Hannah felt warmth spread through her chest. The poetry was nice, but I think I like the real you better. You barely know the real me yet, Lucas pointed out. Then I look forward to learning, Hannah said simply. Over the following days, they fell into a rhythm. Lucas worked on the ranch from dawn until dusk, but he always took time to eat meals with Hannah, to talk with her, to show her the work he was doing. Hannah threw herself into making the cabin more of a home, sewing curtains from fabric Mrs. Crawford brought by, planting a small garden near the creek, learning to cook the simple meals Lucas preferred. Mrs. Crawford and Mrs. Bennett visited regularly, bringing Hannah into the small community of ranch wives. They taught her how to bake bread in Lucas's temperamental stove, how to preserve food for winter, how to shoot a rifle in case she was ever alone and trouble came calling. They never stared at her scar, never treated her as an object of pity. Out here, survival mattered more than appearance. 2 weeks after the wedding, Hannah was gathering eggs from the chicken coop Lucas had built when she heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Lucas came running from the barn, and Hannah saw tension in every line of his body. Get inside, he said sharply. Now. Hannah hurried to the cabin, watching through the window as 3 men rode into the yard. They were rough-looking, unshaven, with hard eyes that surveyed the ranch with calculating interest. Lucas stood in front of the barn, his hand resting casually near the gun at his hip. Help you gentlemen, Lucas called out. Heard you got yourself a new wife, one of the men said, leaning forward in his saddle. Thought we would come by and offer congratulations. Much appreciated, Lucas said, his voice carefully neutral. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. Seems unfriendly, Norton, another man said. Not even inviting us in for a drink of water. Water trough is right there, Lucas said, gesturing. Help yourselves and your horses. The men exchanged glances. The first one, who seemed to be the leader, grinned, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "We also heard you are doing right well with those army contracts. Wondered if you might need partners. We could help protect your interests, make sure nothing bad happens to your stock." So that was it. Protection money, thinly veiled threats. Hannah's heart hammered as she watched Lucas stand his ground. "I do not need partners," Lucas said evenly, "and my stock is plenty protected. Now I have asked you politely to move along. Do not make me ask impolitely." The tension stretched out, and Hannah found herself reaching for the rifle the neighbor women had taught her to use. She checked that it was loaded, her hand surprisingly steady. Finally, the leader laughed. "All right, Norton, you are not interested. But if you change your mind, we will be around." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Give our regards to your bride." They turned their horses and rode off, but not quickly. It was a deliberate show, a message that they were leaving because they chose to, not because they had been forced. Lucas did not move until they were out of sight. Then he came to the cabin. "Are you all right?" he asked Hannah immediately. "I should be asking you that," Hannah said, setting the rifle aside with shaking hands. "Who were those men?" "Drifters who have been causing trouble in the area," Lucas said grimly. "Calling themselves the Garrett Gang, though they are more thieves than anything organized. They have been shaking down smaller ranchers, stealing cattle and horses. I was hoping they would leave me alone, but I guess my luck just ran out." "What are we going to do?" Hannah asked. "We are not going to do anything," Lucas said firmly. "I am going to ride into town tomorrow and talk to the sheriff. Let him know they are threatening ranchers again. In the meantime, I want you to keep that rifle close and stay near the cabin when I am working. Can you do that?" Hannah nodded, though the thought of Lucas in danger made her stomach clench. In just 2 weeks, she had come to care for this quiet, kind man more than she had thought possible. The idea of something happening to him was unbearable. That night, Lucas stayed in the cabin instead of the barn. He did not try to share the bed, instead settling onto the floor with a bedroll, but Hannah found his presence comforting. She lay awake for hours, listening to his breathing, thinking about how quickly life could change. 2 weeks ago, she had been a desperate woman with no prospects. Now she was a wife with something to lose. The next morning, Lucas rode into Green River while Hannah stayed at the ranch, rifle within reach as promised. The hours crawled by. She tried to keep busy with chores, but her eyes kept straying to the horizon, watching for riders. Lucas returned in the late afternoon, his expression grim. "Sheriff says his hands are tied unless the gang actually does something. Says he cannot arrest men for making threats. He will send a deputy to patrol this area more often, but that is all he can promise." "So we are on our own," Hannah said. "I will not let them hurt you," Lucas said fiercely. "I swear to you, Hannah, I will protect you and this ranch." "I know you will," Hannah said, "but you should also know that I can protect myself if needed. Those neighbor women taught me well." Lucas looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I believe they did. But let us hope it does not come to that." For several days, nothing happened. The ranch work continued, and slowly they both began to relax again. Lucas made progress on the new house, and Hannah planted more of the garden. In the evenings, they would sit outside and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about everything and nothing. Lucas told her about growing up in Missouri, about coming west as a young man seeking opportunity. Hannah told him about Philadelphia, about her life before the fire, and slowly, painfully, about the fire itself. "I was upstairs when it started," she said one evening, her voice quiet. "I smelled smoke and tried to wake everyone, but it spread so fast. The stairs were already burning. My father threw me out the window, told me to run for help. But by the time I came back with neighbors, it was too late. The whole house was engulfed. I tried to run back in, but someone caught me, held me back. Part of the roof collapsed and a burning beam fell on me. That is how I got this." She touched her scar. Lucas reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It was the most intimate touch they had shared since their wedding kiss. "I am sorry you went through that," he said softly, "but I am grateful you survived, grateful that you came here, grateful that I get to know you." Hannah squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They sat like that as the stars came out, hands linked, and Hannah felt something shift inside her. This was not just gratitude or companionship. This was the beginning of love. A week after the confrontation with the Garrett gang, Hannah woke in the middle of the night to the sound of horses. She sat up immediately, heart pounding, and saw that Lucas was already awake, pulling on his boots. "Stay here," he whispered, grabbing his gun. "Not a chance," Hannah whispered back, reaching for the rifle. They moved to the window together. In the moonlight, Hannah could see shadows moving near the barn. At least 4 men, maybe more. One was carrying what looked like a torch. "They are going to burn the barn," Lucas said, his voice tight with fury. "All my horses are in there." He moved toward the door, but Hannah grabbed his arm. "If you go out there alone, they will kill you." "I cannot let them burn my animals alive," Lucas said, and the anguish in his voice cut through Hannah like a knife. "Then we go together," Hannah said. "We slip out the back, circle around. I will create a distraction while you get the horses out." "Hannah, no, we do not have time to argue," Hannah said. "Those horses will die if we do nothing. Now move." They went out the back window, keeping low, using the darkness as cover. Hannah's heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear anything else, but her hands were steady on the rifle. They worked their way around the cabin until they had a clear view of the barn. One man was at the barn door, torch in hand, while the others kept watch. Hannah recognized the leader from before, the one with the tobacco-stained teeth. "You ready?" Hannah whispered to Lucas. He looked at her, and even in the darkness, she could see the fear and pride mingled in his eyes. "Be careful." Hannah stood up and fired the rifle into the air. The crack echoed across the valley like thunder, and the men spun around, startled. She fired again, then ducked and ran, drawing their attention away from the barn just as Lucas sprinted for the door. "There," someone shouted, and Hannah heard gunfire. She threw herself behind the water trough, her breath coming in gasps. More shots, and she risked a glance over the edge. Lucas had the barn door open and was driving the horses out. They thundered into the night, panicked by the gunfire. One of the men tried to grab Lucas, and Hannah fired without thinking, the bullet kicking up dirt at the man's feet. He jumped back with a curse, and Lucas ran for cover behind a wagon. "You crazy woman," the leader shouted. "We are just trying to teach your husband a lesson." "Consider it taught," Hannah shouted back. "Now get off our land before I aim higher." There was a long pause, then the sound of hoofbeats, not approaching but retreating. Hannah waited, hardly daring to breathe, until Lucas called out, "They are gone. They are riding out." Hannah stood on shaking legs. Lucas ran to her, pulling her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "You saved them," he said into her hair. "You saved all of them. My God, Hannah, you could have been killed." "So could you," Hannah said, her own arms wrapped around him just as tightly. "I was not going to let that happen." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the moonlight. When Lucas finally pulled back, his hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs gentle on her cheeks. "I love you," he said, the words fierce and raw. "I know it has only been 3 weeks. I know I have no right to feel this much this fast. But I love you, Hannah. You are the bravest, strongest, most amazing woman I have ever met, and I love you." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever love anyone. I thought I was too broken, too damaged, but you make me feel whole again." Lucas kissed her then, not gentle like their wedding kiss, but passionate and desperate. Hannah kissed him back with everything in her, all the fear and relief and love pouring out. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "Come to bed with me," he said softly. "Really with me, as my wife." Hannah nodded, and hand in hand they walked back to the cabin. The next morning they woke tangled together in the narrow bed, sunlight streaming through the window. Hannah had never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely loved. Lucas traced gentle patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch reverent. "We need to round up the horses," he said reluctantly. "They probably did not go far. And we need to report what happened to the sheriff," Hannah added. They dressed and rode into town together, Hannah on a gentle mare Lucas trusted. At the sheriff's office, they gave their statement about the attempted arson. The sheriff, a tired-looking man in his 50s, listened with growing concern. "That is the third ranch they have hit in 2 weeks," he said. "I am sending word to the territorial marshal. This has gotten beyond what my office can handle. In the meantime, I will have deputies patrol out your way more regularly." "Appreciated," Lucas said, his arm around Hannah's shoulders. As they left the office, Mrs. Crawford called out from across the street. "Hannah, Lucas, thank goodness you are both all right. We heard about what happened." News traveled fast in a small town, apparently. Mrs. Crawford insisted they come to her house for lunch, where Mrs. Bennett was already waiting with food and sympathy. The two women clucked over them like mother hens, pressing sandwiches and coffee on them, asking a dozen questions. "You fired on armed men," Mrs. Bennett said to Hannah, her eyes wide. "My dear, you are either very brave or very foolish." "Both," Hannah admitted, "but I could not let them burn our barn with the horses inside." "You are a true Western woman now," Mrs. Crawford declared approvingly. "I knew you had steel in your spine from the first time I met you." They spent the afternoon in town, and several other ranchers and townspeople stopped by to offer support. It was clear that the Garrett gang had made themselves unpopular throughout the area. One rancher, an older man named Mr. Sullivan, offered to lend Lucas some of his ranch hands if needed. "We take care of our own out here," he said gruffly. "Those thieves need to learn they cannot push us around." By the time Lucas and Hannah rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Hannah felt something she had not felt in years, like she belonged somewhere. These people had accepted her completely, scar and all. They judged her by her actions, not her appearance, and found her worthy. Over the next few weeks, Lucas and Hannah worked together to make the ranch more secure. They built a second corral closer to the cabin, moved the horses Lucas was most concerned about to where they could be watched more closely. The other ranchers helped, coming by to lend a hand, to stand watch at night. It became clear that the community was rallying around them. The territorial marshal arrived a month after the attempted burning, a tall man with sharp eyes and a reputation for getting results. He and his deputies set up camp outside Green River and began systematically tracking the Garrett gang. It took 2 weeks, but they finally cornered the gang in a canyon north of town. There was a brief gunfight, and 3 of the gang members were killed, including the leader with the tobacco-stained teeth. The rest were arrested and taken to the territorial prison. When the marshal stopped by the ranch to tell them the news, Lucas and Hannah stood on their porch together, his arm around her waist. "You can rest easy now," the marshal said. "They will not be troubling anyone again." After he left, Lucas turned to Hannah with a grin. "We should celebrate." "What did you have in mind?" Hannah asked. "Well," Lucas said, "the new house is nearly finished. What do you say we have a proper housewarming party? Invite all the neighbors who helped us." Hannah smiled. I think that is a wonderful idea. They spent the next week finishing the new house and preparing for the party. The house was beautiful, everything Lucas had promised and more. 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen with a real cook stove, a parlor with windows that looked out over the valley. Hannah made curtains and Lucas built furniture, and together they turned the empty rooms into a real home. The party was a success, with nearly 30 people crowding into the new house and spilling out onto the porch. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. Hannah stood in the middle of it all, watching Lucas dance with Mrs. Crawford while Mr. Crawford told her stories about the early days of Green River, and felt joy bubble up inside her chest. This was her life now. These were her people. This was her home. Late that night, after everyone had left and they were cleaning up the remains of the party, Lucas pulled Hannah into his arms in the middle of their new parlor. "Dance with me," he said softly, though there was no music. Hannah let him lead her in a slow waltz across the floor, their movements synchronized after weeks of learning each other. When the dance ended, Lucas did not let her go. "I have something to tell you," he said, a note of nervousness in his voice that Hannah rarely heard. "What is it?" "I have been working with the schoolteacher in town. Mrs. Hadley, the one who wrote the letters. She has been teaching me to read better, to write properly. I wanted to surprise you." Lucas pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "This is for you. I wrote it myself. Mrs. Hadley checked my spelling, but the words are mine." Hannah unfolded the paper with shaking hands. The handwriting was careful and slightly uneven but legible. She read, "My dear wife Hannah, I am not good with words, but I will try. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. When you stepped off that stage, I thought you were the bravest person I ever saw. Every day since you make me want to be a better man. I love you more than I knew a person could love. Thank you for choosing me. Your husband, Lucas." Hannah looked up at him through tears. "Lucas, this is beautiful." "It is not poetry like those first letters," Lucas said anxiously, "but it is real." "It is perfect," Hannah said fiercely. "It is absolutely perfect because it is truly you." They made love that night in their new bedroom, in the big bed Lucas had built with his own hands, and Hannah felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. This man who had promised to be worthy of her, who worked so hard to give her everything she needed, who loved her scars and all, he was everything she had never dared to hope for. The seasons turned, summer fading into autumn. The ranch prospered, with Lucas's reputation for training excellent horses spreading throughout the territory. They hired a ranch hand, a young man fresh from Texas named James, who reminded Hannah a bit of the brother she had lost. Lucas taught him the business while Hannah managed the household accounts, her education from Philadelphia finally useful again. As winter approached, Hannah realized she had not had her monthly courses in some time. She said nothing at first, afraid to hope, but when another month passed, she rode into town to see the doctor, Dr. Morrison. A kindly man who had come west for his health confirmed what she suspected. "You are with child, Mrs. Norton. About 3 months along, I would say. Congratulations." Hannah rode home in a daze, her hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. A baby. She and Lucas were going to have a baby. The thought filled her with such joy she thought she might burst from it. She waited until after dinner to tell him, unable to contain her excitement any longer. "Lucas, I went to see the doctor today." Lucas's face went pale. "Are you ill? What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," Hannah said quickly. "In fact, everything is right. Lucas, we are going to have a baby." For a moment, Lucas just stared at her. Then his face transformed, joy lighting him up from within. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Hannah, you have made me the happiest man alive." That winter was hard, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but Hannah barely noticed. She was wrapped in happiness, preparing for the baby's arrival. Mrs. Crawford and Mrs. Bennet visited regularly, bringing baby clothes they had sewn, offering advice about childbirth and motherhood. Lucas hovered over her anxiously, insisting she rest more, do less work. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Hannah reminded him repeatedly, but she loved his concern all the same. The baby came in April of 1879, during a spring rainstorm that drummed on the roof of their house. Dr. Morrison attended the birth, along with Mrs. Crawford and Mrs. Bennet. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Hannah thought she could not bear it, but Lucas stayed by her side throughout, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, telling her how strong she was, how brave. When the baby finally arrived, letting out a healthy wail, Dr. Morrison placed the infant in Hannah's arms. "Congratulations, Mrs. Norton. You have a son." Hannah looked down at the tiny, red-faced baby and felt her heart expand to make room for this new, overwhelming love. Lucas leaned over them both, his eyes wet with tears. "He is perfect," Lucas whispered. "Absolutely perfect, just like his mother." They named him Henry Thomas Norton after both their fathers. Henry had Lucas's dark hair and Hannah's gray eyes, and from the beginning, he seemed determined to make his presence known. He was a loud baby, demanding and energetic, but Hannah and Lucas did not mind. After everything they had been through, the sound of their son's cries was the sweetest music. The ranch continued to grow over the next few years. Lucas expanded his operation, hiring more hands, building more corrals. His horses were sought after throughout Wyoming and beyond, and money that had once been tight became comfortable. He built Hannah an addition to the house, a proper library where she could keep the books she loved and teach Henry to read when he was old enough. When Henry was 2, Hannah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born on a clear autumn day in 1881. They named her Rose Marie, and she was as placid and calm as her brother was energetic. She had her father's blue eyes and her mother's thoughtful nature, and Lucas doted on her shamelessly. Life settled into a happy rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Hannah and Lucas's love deepened with each passing year. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Lucas took Hannah into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, leaving the children with Mrs. Crawford. Over dessert, Lucas pulled out another paper, his handwriting now confident and sure. "I have been practicing," he said with a slight smile. "I wanted to write you something special for our anniversary." Hannah read the letter, tears streaming down her face before she was halfway through. Lucas's words were still simple, still direct, but they were beautiful in their honesty. He wrote about the moment he first saw her in the church, about his fear that he was not good enough for her, about how she had exceeded every hope he had dared to have. He wrote about watching her with their children, about the way she made their house a home, about how every single day he fell more in love with her. "You are good with words now," Hannah said when she finished, looking up at him. "I had a good teacher," Lucas said, taking her hand across the table. "And good inspiration. You make me want to find the right words, Hannah. You make me want to be worthy of you every single day." "You are worthy of me," Hannah said softly. "You have always been worthy of me. You saw me when others looked away. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You gave me a life I never dared to dream of." They went home that night and made love tenderly, their bodies familiar now but no less exciting. Afterwards, lying in Lucas's arms, Hannah thought about the woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 5 years ago, terrified and scarred and certain she was heading for disaster. That woman would never have believed this was possible. This happiness, this love, this beautiful life. The years continued to pass. Henry grew tall and strong, learning the ranch work from his father, showing the same gift with horses that Lucas had. Rose was quieter but no less determined, and she loved books as much as Hannah did, spending hours in the library reading everything she could find. When Henry was 8 and Rose was 6, Hannah became pregnant again. This baby came early, a tiny girl they named Grace Catherine. She was small and frail at birth, and for several terrifying days they were not sure she would survive. Hannah barely left her side, nursing her constantly, willing her to live. Lucas prayed more in those days than he had in his entire life. But Grace was a fighter, and slowly she grew stronger. By the time she was 6 months old, she had caught up to where she should be, and the doctor declared her out of danger. She grew into a lively, mischievous child who kept her older siblings on their toes and made her parents laugh with her antics. The ranch became one of the most successful in Wyoming. Lucas was known throughout the territory as a fair employer and honest dealer. Other ranchers came to him for advice, and he was elected to the territorial legislature, though he turned it down, saying he preferred to stay close to home and family. Hannah became known too, not just as Lucas's wife, but as a woman of strength and substance in her own right. She started a lending library in Green River, donating many of her own books to get it started. She taught reading to ranch children whose families could not afford to send them to school regularly. She was respected and admired, and if anyone noticed her scar, they never mentioned it. It was just part of who she was, like her kind heart or her sharp mind. On their 10th anniversary, the whole community threw them a party. Nearly 100 people came, filling their house and yard, celebrating not just their marriage but what they had built together. Towards the end of the evening, Lucas stood up to make a speech. "Most of you know how Hannah and I met," he began, his voice carrying over the crowd. "She came here expecting to marry a man who could write her poetry and lived in a grand house. Instead, she got me, a barely literate rancher with a leaky cabin and more dreams than money." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Lucas smiled, but his eyes were serious. "What you may not know is what she said to me that first day. She apologized. She said she was not what I ordered, that I had expected someone different, someone whole. And I told her the truth. I told her she was better than I deserved." Lucas looked directly at Hannah now, his love for her written plainly on his face. 10 years later, that is even more true. Hannah made this ranch a success. She made this house a home. She gave me 3 beautiful children and a life beyond anything I imagined. She is the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known, and every single day I thank God that she stepped off that stagecoach in Green River. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Hannah made her way through the crowd to her husband's side, and he pulled her close, kissing her to more cheers and whistling. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Always." As the years passed, their children grew and thrived. Henry fell in love with a rancher's daughter and married at 20, bringing his bride to live on the ranch and help with the growing operation. Rose went east to college, defying convention, and came back with a teaching degree and a passion for education reform. She took over the school in Green River and revolutionized it, bringing in new methods and materials. Grace, the baby who had fought so hard to live, grew into a fearless young woman who could ride and rope as well as any cowboy. She had no interest in marriage, preferring to work alongside her father and brother on the ranch. Lucas's hair turned gray, and Hannah's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, but to each other, they were as beautiful as the day they married. They grew old together gracefully, still holding hands, still stealing kisses when they thought no one was looking, still completely in love. On their 30th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Henry had given them 4 grandchildren, and even Rose, despite her focus on her career, had married a fellow teacher and had 2 children of her own. Grace remained unmarried but was clearly the favorite aunt, spoiling her nieces and nephews shamelessly. The celebration was held outside on a perfect summer day. Long tables were set up under the trees, laden with food. Children ran and played while adults talked and laughed. Lucas and Hannah sat together in chairs of honor, watching the chaos with contentment. "Did you ever imagine this?" Hannah asked softly. "When you were writing those letters through Mrs. Hadley, did you ever think we would end up here?" "Never," Lucas admitted. "I hoped for a companion, someone to share the work and maybe eventually the affection. I never dreamed I would get this. A true partner, a love that only grew deeper, a family that fills my heart to bursting." "When I stepped off that stagecoach," Hannah said, "I was certain my life was over. I thought I was going to my doom. Instead, I found my destiny." Lucas took her hand, the gesture as natural now as breathing. "That makes 2 of us." As the sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, their family gathered around them. Henry proposed a toast, raising his glass high. "To my parents," he said, his voice strong and clear, "who showed us all what true love looks like, who built not just a successful ranch but a legacy of kindness, hard work, and devotion, who proved that the best things in life are worth fighting for." Everyone raised their glasses, calling out, "Hear, hear." "And to Lucas and Hannah." Hannah looked around at her family, at the faces of her children and grandchildren, at the ranch buildings standing solid against the darkening sky, at the mountains that had become as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. This was the life she had never dared to hope for, built with a man who had seen past her scars to the woman beneath. That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Lucas and Hannah stood on their porch together, looking up at the stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear mountain air. "You have any regrets?" Lucas asked, his arm around her shoulders. Hannah leaned into him, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "Not a single one," she said honestly. "You. Only that I did not meet you sooner," Lucas said, "so we could have had more years together." "We still have years ahead," Hannah reminded him. "Then I will make sure every one of them counts," Lucas promised. They stood there until the cold drove them inside, to the house they had built together, to the bed they had shared for 3 decades, to the life they had created from nothing but courage and love. As Hannah drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, she thought about that terrified woman on the stagecoach, certain she was heading toward rejection and disappointment. That woman had been wrong. She had been heading toward home. She had been heading toward love. She had been heading toward the man who would see her, truly see her, and find her not lacking but perfect exactly as she was. And that, Hannah thought as sleep claimed her, had made all the difference. The years continued their gentle march. Lucas and Hannah grew old together with grace and dignity, their love a testament to the power of acceptance and commitment. They watched their grandchildren grow, celebrated new great-grandchildren, and remained the heart of their family until the very end. Lucas passed first at the age of 78, peacefully in his sleep with Hannah beside him. She mourned him deeply but not despairingly, knowing they had been blessed with more years together than many people ever got. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her family, her books, and her memories. On the day she died at the age of 80, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last words were about Lucas. "Tell him I am coming," she whispered to Grace, who held her hand. "Tell him to wait for me." They buried her beside Lucas on a hillside overlooking the ranch, under a sky so blue and vast it seemed to hold all of eternity. The headstones were simple, but the inscription on Hannah's told the whole story. Hannah Thompson Norton, 1855, 1935, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She came seeking hope. She found home years later. The ranch still stood, passed down through generations of Nortons who told the story of their great-great-grandparents. The story of the mail-order bride who thought she was broken and the rancher who thought he was unworthy, and how they found in each other exactly what they needed. The story of how love could transform lives, heal wounds, and build legacies that lasted far beyond a single lifetime. It became a family legend, told and retold, embellished and cherished. But at its heart, it remained a simple truth. Sometimes the things we think are flaws are actually the things that lead us to exactly where we are meant to be. And sometimes, the person we think we are not good enough for turns out to be the person who was made perfectly for us all along. The ranch house still stood a century later, preserved by the family as a historic site. Visitors could tour the rooms where Lucas and Hannah had raised their children, see the library Hannah had created, walk through the barn where Lucas had trained his horses. And in the parlor, framed and carefully preserved, hung the letter Lucas had written for their 5th anniversary, his handwriting careful and full of love. The tour guides told visitors about the couple who had built the ranch, about Hannah's courage and Lucas's devotion. They told about the mail-order bride who had arrived scarred and afraid, and the rancher who had seen past appearances to the incredible woman beneath. They told about a love that had lasted 34 years and created a legacy that continued generations later. And sometimes, when the light hit just right in the parlor, visitors swore they could feel something there. Not a ghost, exactly, but a presence. A sense of enduring love, of two souls so perfectly matched that even death could not truly separate them. The kind of love that changes everything it touches and leaves echoes that last forever. That was the story of Lucas Norton and Hannah Thompson Norton, the rancher and the mail-order bride who found in each other not what they ordered, but what they deserved. A love that transcended appearance and circumstance, a partnership that built an empire, and a happiness that proved that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Their story ended, as all stories must, but the love they created continued on in their descendants, in the ranch that still bore the Norton name, in the library Hannah had founded that still served Green River, in the countless lives they had touched with their kindness and generosity. They had taken their broken pieces and made something whole, something beautiful, something that lasted. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the scars or the struggles, not the letters that were written by someone else or the cabin with the leaky roof. What mattered was that when they found each other, they chose to stay. They chose to love. They chose to build something together that would outlast them both. That was their triumph. That was their legacy. That was their story, and it was one worth telling, worth remembering, worth celebrating for all the years to come. The end.